Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome back Abhishek Mundra. He's a practice director at research firm Everest Group and an author of a new assessment of system integrators who serve Microsoft Dynamics 365 customers. Abhishek tells me about the factors that his team uses to assess service providers when it comes to partnership with Microsoft, types of engagements, customer satisfaction, project outcomes, and more. As part of the assessment, Abhishek and his team spoke with dozens of Microsoft customers, and Abhishek shares some of his observations, including the range of engagement types and satisfaction with global versus regional SIs. Okay, I am here with Abhishek Mundra of Everest Group. Abhishek, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Jason. Good to be back.
Yeah, so for our listeners, maybe they remember you from your previous episode where you joined us, but can you tell us a little bit more about your work at Everest Group?
Hi, I'm Abhishek, and I'm a part of the enterprise platform services practice within Everest Group. Everest Group is a research and advisory firm, and we track the broader global services market. My focus lies in specifically on anything and everything related to enterprise platforms. So we advise enterprises and service providers related to areas around SAP, Dynamics, Oracle, and so on and so forth. We have a published research as well as advisory. So in part of published research, we have a proprietary peak assessment, which is basically a large part of our conversation today will be focused around that.
I've gotten a little bit of a sneak peek at what the new assessment looks like. Can you just tell us what really the goals of the assessment are, what it's all about?
Yeah, so this assessment basically caters to the enterprise audience in terms of helping them understand how different service providers are doing in the market, in terms of who are some of the leading service providers, and even within the service provider ecosystem. So as you understand, right, there are so many players in the market today. So basically, this assessment gives them a view. Okay, who are the leading service providers? And for each of these service providers, like what are some of the strength areas and what are some of the areas that enterprises need to be cautious of when engaging with some of these service providers.
What are some of the factors that you're looking for or using to assess a service provider and their work in the Microsoft channel?
Yeah. So if you look at a peak matrix assessment picture, right, so there's a x-axis and a y-axis, right? So on the x-axis, it's largely about their vision and capabilities around Dynamics 365 services. So when it comes to vision, it's about what kind of future roadmap and strategy and what kind of depth of focus they have on Dynamics 365 as a platform area. Second, it's about scope of services. So what kind of services they are offering, what kind of modules they are covering, whether they have a higher focus on consulting implementation or they have a higher focus on managed services. Then you have a factor such as innovation and investments, which talks about what kind of solutions, tools, industry-specific capabilities they are building for Dynamics 365. And finally, in terms of their delivery footprint and sourcing mix, how they are doing. So that's for the x-axis. On the y-axis, it's about market impact. So basically factors such as number of clients they have, what kind of revenue base they have, what kind of portfolio mix. So there are service providers who have a higher focus on a specific industry. Maybe they are more focused on BFSI or someone is more focused on manufacturing. So that gets assessed under portfolio mix. Finally, value delivered, I think, and this is very important parameter, which talks about the kind of satisfaction scores some of these service providers have. So basically, as a part of this assessment, we ended up talking to around 50 plus enterprise customers of some of these service providers. We do these one-on-one discussions. These are like 30 to 45-minute long conversation where we try and understand not only from a services perspective, but overall from a Dynamics demand perspective, what are the areas where they are thinking of expansion from a dynamic standpoint, what are areas where a service provider has helped them, and potentially for future engagements, what are some of the areas that a service provider may want to do better.
All right, interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into some of those topics a bit more here. Maybe first, can you give a bit of perspective on what's changed since the last time you reported on this space?
Yeah. So the way I would like to answer this question is twofold. Like one, let me first talk about some of the things that are happening from a broader platform portfolio perspective, like how some of the leading enterprises today are revisiting their overall platform strategy. And then I will get into some of the specific aspects of Dynamics. right? From an overall market perspective, there are three broad themes that we see in the market today. Firstly, overall focus of enterprises on value realization. I think that has really gone up across our conversation, be it on enterprise side or service provider side, right? There is a clear demarcation in the market in terms of service providers who can help enterprises realize business value faster. I think those are the service providers that are getting preferred in the market today. And I think a big piece of this value realization is in terms of getting into industry specific transformation. So there is a lot of focus on building on top of your existing ERP or CRM investments, which are now specific to the industry context or the even the micro industry context that an enterprise is in. So that's first. Second, composability as a overall theme has gained a lot of traction in the enterprise audience. There is, from a broader platform portfolio perspective, every enterprise is looking to build a unified data architecture, and then wherein you can plug and play some of these platform capabilities, be it Microsoft Dynamics or SAP or Oracle for that matter. Enterprises today are more open to this plug and play of platforms across areas of functional transformation. So, a warehouse management can be done via Manhattan, and a sales and marketing transformation can be done via Dynamics. I think that kind of an openness is there. So that's second. And I think third and the most important one is in terms of how they are perceiving the overall ERP modernization story, right? So that ERP modernization story has a lot more focus on creating systems of engagements that are more agile, right? So there are a lot of enterprises who have shifted away their focus from modernizing their entire legacy ERP, or lifting and shifting their entire ERP to cloud and then adopting new platform solutions. No one has the time as well as budgets to carry out such large transformations. What they are looking at is, I have a core that is intact on SAP ECC, but can I adopt Dynamics for transforming my sales function? Or can I have a service now layer on top of it to automate newer workflows? So that is definitely happening in the market. Now, coming to the second aspect of it, specifically from a dynamics lens perspective, right? So there's a lot of interesting observations we see in the market, right? 2 years back, when we ran this assessment, uh, largely the adoption of Dynamics was focused on a small and medium business segment, the SMB segment as we refer. Even the largest of the implementations were in the mid-market segment, so to say. But this year we saw there is a lot of enterprises who are, even in that very large and mega enterprise base, are now more open to adopting Dynamics as a platform, specifically in areas wherein there is already some footprint of Microsoft. I think those are the enterprises who are more open to adopt Dynamics for a specific transformation engagement. So, for example, there was a customer conversation I was having, their entirety on SAP and Oracle largely, but then for their field service management, they ended up preferring Dynamics solution. So that was pretty interesting to hear. And the same is happening for a lot of other enterprises as well. We see in the sales and marketing space as well, a lot of large enterprise customers have shown openness to move away from the likes of Salesforce to Dynamics. So that is again a very interesting observation to see. Yeah, and I think from a service provider landscape standpoint as well, we see a lot of the specialist partners gaining prominence because enterprise expectation around agility and shorter turnaround time, better value realization. So a lot of the specialist service providers who have a dedicated focus on Dynamics as a product area, I think they have started gaining a lot of prominence. For a lot of larger GSIs, Dynamics is becoming more important given the growth and overall size of the portfolio is shaping up well.
Really interesting. I mean, there's so much there that you just touched on. One of the things I thought of First was in terms of these providers, how much variability you're seeing between them, especially when it comes to meeting some of the challenges and some of the, maybe even, the opportunities that you just talked about, like willingness in the enterprise space, where so many of these providers that you assessed work with some of the biggest corporations in the world, global companies with, like you said, SAP footprints, Oracle footprints, maybe wouldn't have been looking at Microsoft Business Application as seriously in the past, but here they are, bringing them in for, at least for some strategic places within their larger architecture. What has that done to sort of or what are you seeing in terms of these service providers and the range of their knowledge, I guess you would say, or the range of where their strengths lie? Is there really a big range?
Yeah, definitely. So I think if you look at the assessment picture for this year, so there has been a lot of shifts in the market. So there are a lot of service providers for whom Dynamics as a platform area has gained more prominence. So if you look at the picture this year, there are a lot of star performers we have evaluated. So star performers are basically providers who have significantly moved in the overall assessment image. So, the likes of Infosys, TCS, Capgemini, Birlasoft, Alithya, Sonata, I think these providers have improved significantly both on the X and Y axis. Now, coming to factors, right? Where does the differentiation lies, right? From a value perspective. So, one thing definitely is there, from a industry specificity perspective, right? A lot of providers have from their dynamics portfolio perspective very industry specific focus, so they are going after a specific set of industries, be it BFSI, manufacturing, or high tech. So they are building industry specific offerings for this particular client target. So that is one that differentiates them. Second is ability to showcase capabilities across the stack, across the Microsoft stack. So, as I said, for a lot of large and very large enterprises, the tendency to adopt Microsoft Dynamics is there only if Microsoft is a crucial part of their broader IT transformation story. And then therein, if they are engaging with some of these larger GSIs, they are closely evaluating capabilities beyond Dynamics as well. What kind of focus they have in the overall Microsoft as a portfolio of offerings. Yeah, I think those are some crucial aspects. I think beyond that, important area is also the advisory or the consulting capabilities. I think that is also truly differentiating a lot of service providers in the market. There's a big focus on cost optimization, process modernization, right? Which goes beyond just implementation or consulting for implementation, right? The technical consulting part. So basically guiding enterprises in terms of what will the future of finance look like for them in their industry subsegment, or what will the future of sales and marketing look like, and then providing them the best options and the best view of the platforms that can help orchestrate that future view. So you may be having great dynamics capabilities, but for large engagements, you also need to have good capabilities in some of the other platform areas as well, so as to better able to orchestrate that functional transformation for that particular enterprise.
All right. Yeah. And, thinking back to some of the other things you mentioned, ERP modernization, composability of architectures, are there, maybe those are good examples, or are there others that are emerging types of engagements that you think will become more popular in the Dynamics 365 ecosystem that you're hearing about from the service providers you were talking to, or perhaps some of those customers that you were in touch with?
So there are two aspects to it, right? From a module perspective, right? So let's say talking about composability. So beyond just your Dynamics sales marketing solution, there is again, due to that composability piece, there is a lot of focus on data analytics, automation, AI. So that is gaining a lot of prominence to better able to orchestrate that composability aspect. That's one. And from an engagement construct perspective as well, there's, as I mentioned in the beginning, right, a lot of focus on value realization. So there are a lot of service providers who are getting into outcome based construct with especially in cases of front office transformation. Therein, I think when it comes to a lot of these outcome based transformation conversations, there is always a debate about enterprise maturity to get into some of these. So we have increasingly seeing enterprises now being more open to get into some of these. And the second is easy way for service providers to track back value to themselves. So I think that's relatively more easier than a lot of the front office transformation. Therein we see almost 10 to 15% of the engagements getting into some aspect of outcome based engagement constructs.
One thing I'm curious about as I look at an assessment like this is the feedback that you get from the customer side, or maybe just your own assessment of what you think these service providers need to improve on in the future.
So that's a very good question, because if you look at some of the buyer side conversations, so beyond understanding the dynamics footprint and what's working, what's not working, we also end up running a short quiz on the capabilities and asking them to rate a particular service provider on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being lowest and 10 being highest. And we track down different parameters: technical capabilities, domain specific, industry specific capabilities, pricing, commercials, talent. So there are 8-10 parameters. So interestingly, when we take a overall view of these things, so 3 parameters stood out for us, right, wherein there was a significant gap in terms of enterprise demand not being able to meet. So first is talent, right? So there is a lot of struggle when it comes to talent management, ability of service providers to scale up talent as and when needed, to manage attrition as and when needed. I think that is definitely a challenge. Also, dynamics as a market is increasingly becoming hotter from a talent perspective. There is definitely a strong demand supply gap that exists in the market today. So that is, I think, a topmost challenge. Second is around consulting capabilities. So a lot of service providers would preach about, they have good consulting capabilities, but largely what they are doing is you're doing the technical consulting part of it, around what kind of application architecture needs to be placed, or road mapping for a dynamics implementation. But I think what's truly needed for the enterprises today is basically service providers who can think ahead of the vendor innovation curve. So I think that is something that a lot of enterprises are actively seeking, because if you look at the pace at which Dynamics as a platform is growing, if an enterprise is getting into Dynamics today, they would want to understand what the picture of Dynamics would look like 2 years, 3 years down the line, and accordingly, get into implementation or prioritization today. So that kind of consulting capabilities is missing. And finally, third thing is around commercial flexibility. So I think in the dynamic services landscape, there is a strong tendency for buyers to get into implementations which are commercially more flexible and more value driven. So yeah, those 3 areas I would say service providers would need to do better.
On that last point was something I did want to touch on. I think you're referring to outcomes and value driven types of engagements. Is that something that is that the same thing?
Yes. So that is one piece of it, but then it's also about being cost effective, right? So no enterprise that we talk are fully satisfied with the cost of the engagement, because platforms don't come cheap from a licensing perspective. And then if you add on to the services and everything, that entire proposition becomes very costly. So they are on the lookout for most cost effective solution, but at the same time, something that can drive value.
And in terms of your assessments, is that an element? I mean, obviously that's a huge element for the client. Is that something that factors into your assessments of the various providers?
Yes, we definitely consider that both on X and Y axis, right? From an X axis, innovation and investment, right? So we do consider what kind of commercial innovation, engagement level innovation any service provider, and on the Y axis as well, what kind of value is being delivered.
One thing I wanted to touch on was just in looking at the preview version of the report, and there's a lot of service providers on there, many who I recognize and I guess you'd say expect to be ranked and assessed, but there's certainly quite a few who, for myself personally, I didn't even recognize some of the names, or maybe I knew them, but didn't know they had much of a footprint or involvement in the Microsoft channel or in the Dynamics Business Applications channel. Is that just me? And maybe are some of them regional, or are there new entrants that you're seeing? Were there any that you maybe have added that you didn't? I'm not looking for like specifics, but are there companies that have been added to the assessment since 2 years ago?
Yeah, so definitely, there are, few providers who have been added and few who have been dropped out. But then let's say for, this year's picture, right? So there are, if you look at the aspirants quadrant, right? There are players such as Buildersoft, Gav, Smart Labs. So, these kind of providers, so I think broader context to it is, right? So a lot of providers, Dynamics as a practice is growing a lot more demand driven rather than, providers building capability grounds up and then getting into it. So, and that's where I said there's a lot of inbound demand in areas wherein Microsoft already has a footprint and therein enterprises are asking for Dynamics as a solution offering. So that's one. Second, a lot of these providers have a specific focus on, region and industry of choice, right? So for example, there is a player such as Gavs. So they have a higher focus on sales and marketing as a module, and specifically in the North America region. And based on the feedback that we have in the market today, they are playing from a cost-effective implementation lens. There are players such as Mar Labs, again, strong heritage in manufacturing, retail, CPG, and have a higher focus on supply chain and finance related modules. You have likes of Buildersoft, right? Again, manufacturing, high tech, implementation heavy focus. So I think that's where these are, trying to create a niche for themselves.
When you talk to the providers in the space, and if they are looking to achieve some of the goals that you mentioned, for example, increasing their talent bases, having more capacity to service their customers, one common way that I've seen, over the last few years, actually kind of consistently, is, the acquisition of smaller shops by some of these big providers just to add capacity, to add expertise in an industry, as you were talking about. Do these service providers talk about some of those goals or those plans with you, or do you see evidence of it changing?
Yeah, definitely. Right. A lot of GSIs, I think across platform areas, right, the talent is definitely a challenge. And it's no easy feat to scale up talent based on, the kind of dynamics that are there in the market today. In fact, in this year's assessment as well, there were a lot of providers who were able to scale up significantly on back of certain acquisitions. So, for example, Capgemini made some relevant acquisitions focused on Power Platform modules and modules such as sales, service, marketing. And that's where, if you see Capgemini's positioning, they have jumped into leaders quadrant. And similarly, there are a lot of other providers as well who have invested into acquisitions. So a lot of these acquisitions are public, but then there are a lot of acquisitions which are happening just purely from a talent acquisition standpoint. So yeah, definitely those are there as well.
So when it comes to the range of SIs and global SIs in your assessment, can you talk more about how mid-market SIs are competing alongside the larger firms?
Yeah, definitely a very interesting question, right? So if you look at the overall assessment image, right, there are, service providers such as HSO, Alithya, Hitachi Solutions, Sonata Software. Like these service providers are competing at par with some of the larger GSIs in the market, be it Accenture or Infosys or TCSs of the world. And I think one thing that's kind of differentiating some of these specialist providers is, their agility and focus on Dynamics as a platform area, because the way Dynamics as a platform area is evolving, newer modules, newer updates, and just that singular focus on a specific platform offering. I think that is kind of differentiating them in terms of ability to create better value and faster value for enterprises.
One of the things that kind of underscores or influences all of these issues that you've talked about, I think, are relationships between, or I guess the interrelationship between Microsoft, the service providers, the GSIs, and then the end customers. And it can be a fairly complex relationship. I know that this report is really not meant to map that or analyze that in particular, but do you have any feedback on what you're hearing, let's say from the GSIs, in terms of actually managing their relationship with Microsoft and how that impacts their ability to deliver in the marketplace?
No, I think definitely that's a great point, that you have touched upon. And there is very interesting dynamics in the market. There's always a lot of push and pull in the market when it comes to service provider, vendor. There are a lot of service providers for whom Microsoft is a dedicated practice. So end-to-end stack gets housed under a single Microsoft unit. But then there are a lot of service providers who have Dynamics as part of their broader platform services portfolio. Now, these two dynamics are different, right? Because in a dynamic platform portfolio, always there will be a question of which platform a service provider will push in their market conversations. While in a singular stack view, it's easier to create a case for Dynamics. So that definitely is there. But I think apart from that, interestingly, I think other area that I can think of is the entire conversation around Power Platform. So if you look at most of the Dynamics engagement over the last 1-2 years sort of a time frame, I think largely 70-80% of them have Power Platform integrated as the scope of engagement. So which makes Power Platform a huge area where you should have talent catering to that. But then when it comes to from a revenue standpoint, service providers won't be making much out of Power Platform because there's a lot of low code, no code capabilities that enterprises would want to do it themselves. So there is always that tussle that what's money making for providers versus what's money making for Dynamics. I think in Power Platform case, we see service providers, rather than expanding net new talent for Power Platform, they're kind of scaling up majority of their talent base into Power Platform so that they are aware of Power Platform. They have certifications related to that. So yeah, that's how some of these things are getting balanced.
So they're trying to help their existing talent add Power Platform competencies or skills rather than hiring just for that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the, I was just at an event, and one of the sort of leaders of the sales organization at Microsoft for Business Apps was giving a little bit of a presentation, not really in depth, but he mentioned from the stage in kind of a bit of an offhand way, he said that he doesn't want partners to look at the Power Platform opportunity as going in, doing a fairly small scale, center of excellence deployment, essentially, where they train the customer on how to do their own application development at a fixed price or something, and then that be the end of it. They do seem to want to make Power Platform an area where providers can build a practice and can be the service provider, of those development projects. But I don't know that they fully have that thought out yet or have a clear strategy on that. So as you mentioned, I will be interested to see how partners adjust to that and whether they do find sort of more lucrative opportunities that allow them to do some of that engagement with the client rather than the client thinking they can do it all themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I was saying, this kind of tussle is always there. So platform vendor will have their own notion about, a specific offering. But then for service provider, unless and until it's making money or it's big enough for them, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to scale up. So I think that kind of logic also applies to a lot of newer modules and offerings that are being launched by Dynamics, and in fact, some of the other platform vendors as well. So therein, I think for a GSI who has focus on large customers and large engagements, it kind of does not make a lot of business case to scale up into those smaller and emerging areas because there is no potential business case. There is no validation about the demand. But at the same time, there are a lot of specialist partners who are agile enough to scale up into some of those emerging platform areas. Therein we see there is a lot of differentiation that is being created. So these specialist partners who are agile enough to adopt newer platforms, newer offerings, and take them to the enterprises, I think they are gaining more and more mind share from a Microsoft standpoint and even from an enterprise mind share standpoint.
Interesting. One of the details I did want to get your perspective on, because I see it or I hear about it a lot, is that one of the complexities in the Microsoft channel. I don't know if this happens in other spaces, but it seems like it's fairly common for larger customers of Microsoft to actually be engaged at any point in time with more than one service provider, right? They have perhaps a GSI who's focused on their Microsoft 365 activities, another one, providing some Azure services, and another one that they're running a Dynamics 365 sales project with. I'm just making that up, but it's certainly the case that a customer will have multiple partners. Were you seeing that reflected in your research, and does that complicate your assessments?
Yeah, so I think definitely that aspect is there. And to your surprise, that aspect is not only there across platform infrastructure, so basically apps, platform, and infrastructure, but that's also within platform as well. So in an engagement, Accenture may be doing some kind of F&O implementation, but some of the other modules would be done by a altogether new service provider. And it can also be broken down from a scope of services perspective. So for example, service provider coming in and doing the implementation part, but then the managed services and support services are being carried out by other service provider. So yeah, those kind of things are definitely there. Because I think that's more to do with I think firstly from a service provider perspective as well. So there are service providers who have a strategic focus on doing implementation and consulting more and deprioritizing managed services, unless and until it's part of the RFP and is kind of a qualifying criteria to be into that. So only those cases some of these providers are taking a managed services engagements. So that's one. I think second, when very interesting, I think we did not touch upon it earlier, is when it comes to business decision making stakeholders, right? Over the last 2-year time frame, and we'll be shortly out with, by the way, a new analysis on the state of the market report where we talk about a lot of these aspects of pricing, commercial constructs, stakeholders. So I think one thing that we have touched upon in that report is around who are the stakeholders for Dynamics engagement. There's definitely an uptick in the business stakeholders when it comes to the percentage of stakeholders who are responsible for Dynamics engagement. And therein we see, so if your supply chain transformation is run by a chief supply chain officer, so he may be doing things differently, and that supply chain module will be piece of the bigger supply chain transformation piece, and therein Dynamics would be done by, let's say, someone like a TCS, but then finance and operations will be run by a other business function, and they have a higher stake in terms of who will they partner with. So therein we have a different provider, which is unlike the earlier case wherein I would not say earlier is still happening, but cases wherein your CIO or the tech organization is solely responsible for deciding how things are shaping up. So in those cases, a lot of these things are carried out in an integrated fashion.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess ultimately these customers are making these decisions based on what they think is best for them and the way they're approaching these investments. Like you said, maybe some of these projects are becoming a little more sophisticated in the way they bring in those stakeholders based on business needs and process. So pretty interesting.
Yeah.
All right. What else? I mean, I know, like you said, you have other research going on. Can you maybe tell us again, just like when is this report already published and available? I know I've had a quick look at a preview of it. Is that something that we can provide a little more information on to our listeners?
Yeah, definitely. So as part of our practice, like we have a dedicated, focus area for Microsoft, as a research. And I think the report that we just talked about was just one piece of it, which is the peak matrix assessment. There are, other reports in terms of state of the market report, wherein we will talk about, things from an overall market understanding, enterprise, how overall enterprise demands is shaping up and what kind of supply side activity we are seeing at an aggregated level. So that's there. Soon we will also be coming up with, reports around specific stakeholder for financial services of the industry. So what are different priorities for Microsoft business application stakeholders in financial services of the industry? I think that's a very interesting piece of work that will be out sometime early next year. What else, right? And there are some certain other reports which are broader from a cloud services perspective. We have a very strong focus on tracking the Azure services and infrastructure services market. So that assessment, I think, is also published.
Abhishek, I really appreciate you being here today. It was great to talk to you again and to get an update on your latest work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jason. Again, always great to talk to you and exchange perspectives.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Abhishek for joining me. For more information on Everest Group's research, we'll put a link in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can leave me an email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, please do follow us on social media. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.